Three foreigners captured while fighting for Ukraine will hear the result of their appeal against the death sentence within a month. Last month, a Russian-backed separatist court in Donetsk found them guilty of taking action towards a, quote, violent overthrow of power. Ukraine and its allies say the men are prisoners of war and are entitled to protection under the Geneva Convention. U.S. President Joe Biden arrives in the Middle East on Wednesday at a time of several regional and global challenges. First stop is Israel, which recently normalized relations with several Gulf countries and is in talks to form an Arab-Israeli military alliance against Iran. Well, Biden faces calls for tougher action on Tehran. Negotiations have stalled despite attempts to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. He'll also meet Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who wants to revive the two-state solution talks and bring back U.S. financial support. Biden will be meeting other Arab leaders at the Gulf Cooperation Council summit on his last stop in Saudi Arabia. He had previously refused to deal with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman after the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Let's speak to Rami Khouri, who's the Director of Global Engagement at the American University of Beirut. He's joining us, though, from New York. Welcome back to Al Jazeera, Rami Khouri. So what is the ultimate purpose of Biden's trip to the Middle East?
It's not really clear. I don't think it's very clear to Biden and his staff. It's certainly not clear to almost every analyst who has written about it and discussed it in the last week or so. The real dilemma is that Biden is trying to continue with a process that 4 or 5 previous American presidents have used in the Middle East unsuccessfully in most cases. And that means to try to create a coalition of Arab, Israeli, American, and some other Western parties that work together to push back against some enemy or the enemy of the day. Today, the enemy of the day is Iran. Before, it used to be ISIS. Before that, it used to be radical Iraq and Syria. Before that, it was the Soviet Union. Before that, it was Al-Qaeda. Now you've also got Russia and China into the mix as people to be pushed back. The American foreign policy that tries to use this method doesn't work because it doesn't focus on the fundamental interests and rights of the 460 million Arabs in the predominantly Arab region. And the things that they're trying to do are largely, not totally, but largely, American policy is largely driven by what is good for Israel, which Biden himself said that's why he's going to Saudi Arabia, what's good for donors to the American political parties, and what's good for lobby groups that represent domestic and international lobbies in the United States.
Right, and there certainly is talk. Yeah, and there certainly is talk of. You were just mentioning that to fighting back against Iran just a moment ago, and for a while now there has been talk about creating this what's been dubbed as an Arab NATO, which includes Israel. Excuse me. Do you expect to see any movement on that front as a result of his trip in the Middle East?
They will talk about it, of course, and they'll make some vague statements. But what I've been saying is that they tried this 3 or 4 times. George Shultz tried it. Alexander Haig tried it. James Baker tried it. Mike Pompeo tried it. Every American Secretary of State almost for the last 30, 40 years has tried to make some kind of coalition like this. But you can't have a successful policy in the predominantly Arab Muslim region if that policy is largely defined by the interests of the Israelis, lobbies in the United States, and a few minority leaders in Arab countries who don't have a lot of popular legitimacy. It just doesn't work, and it's never worked, and it probably won't work. It could work if they try to address the one big issue that matters to the vast majority of ordinary men and women across the region, including in Turkey and in Iran and the Arab countries, which is the rights of the Palestinians. So if you had a real, genuine Arab-Israeli peace, which we all hope will happen, then you could get progress on regional cooperation and security and energy, economic development. This is the real dilemma that Biden faces, the inability to accurately analyze the trends inside the Middle East and to figure out how the United States can serve its interests as well as the interests of the majority of people in the Middle East, how they can do that through a policy. They've never been able to do it.
He's also, I mean, he's written an opinion piece ahead of his trip. I'm sure that you've read it, Rami Khouri, and one of the things that he discussed, or he wrote about, in fact, is that he will support the continued normalization between Israel and Arab countries. This, of course, in the wake of the so-called Abraham Accords. I mean, what is the political calculation for Biden behind promoting normalizing ties with Israel at this point?
The political calculation is that the Israeli government likes it, the Israeli people tend to like it, and small groups of men who rule Arab countries like it. But this doesn't really serve and it serves the interests of American politicians, they think. But what's fascinating, a poll just came out last week by Shibli Telhami at University of Maryland and his colleagues who did a poll, which they do regularly, showing that the majority of people in the United States are not that impressed by a policy that is focused on helping Israel, mainly if it's supposed to be a regional policy, that they want more even-handed approaches. And certainly among Democrats, growing numbers of Democrats are unhappy with American policies in the Middle East that predominantly respond to what are seen as Israeli interests. They'd rather see Israelis and Palestinians and Arabs and Turks and Iranians all living a decent life and working closely with the United States. But the United States hasn't been able to do that, so they come up with these slightly fanciful arrangements, and they keep trying them. They don't work, and they wonder why they don't work. And then a new administration comes in and does the same thing over and over again. So you've got a legacy now of 40, 50 years of foreign policies of the U.S. in the region that have helped shatter much of the region where 80% of the people are now poor and vulnerable, and are causing damage to political leaders in the United States as well. So it's really time for a significant reassessment and more serious, more effective policies. The American negotiations that led to the nuclear agreement with Iran and the other countries was a terrific example of how states can do this.
Just one more for you, and particularly on Saudi Arabia, because even before he's come to the region, Biden has had to defend his decision to travel to Saudi Arabia. In that opinion piece I was mentioning a moment ago, he had to explain his visit to the country that he once called a pariah state, as you know. But how much of, to what extent are those record oil prices over in the U.S., where you are, a contributing factor to his visit to Saudi Arabia?
They certainly are a factor. He'd like to get the Saudis to pump about 2 million barrels of oil a day extra. And most people feel this is impossible to do for political reasons, for technical reasons. And by the way, one of the major new developments in the region, which the United States still has not absorbed because it doesn't understand how the region really works. One of the major new developments is that you have countries like the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, a couple of others that will do whatever they feel is in their best interests, and not always will they do what the United States wants or tells them to do. This is new, and the United States is not sure how to deal with this. But again, the oil price situation, the energy situation is a short-term issue. It's a technical issue. It's related to Ukraine and other things where the U.S. is deeply involved. But it can be resolved on a long-term basis, but it's not being resolved on a long-term basis. So the American president tries for a quick fix, and it tends not to work, and it'll rebound against him, especially as we'll probably see in the midterm elections in the U.S. in November.
All right. Thank you so much, Rami Khouri, for speaking to us from New York.
Thank you.